Hi, I'm Hamilton Throckmorton. I am a pastor of a church in Chagrin Falls, Ohio, and being a pastor is one of the most wonderful things I can imagine. It's an opportunity for me to be present with people in all sorts of places in their lives, in their births, in their deaths, in their marriages, baptisms, and it's a privilege to be able to be present in that. I also have the opportunity every week to reflect on who we are as people and where we're going and what we are called to be and do, and it's a really remarkable privilege to be able to do that. I'm also outside of my work life. I'm married to Mary Seneschal. I have two sons, Alex and Taylor, who are in their early 20s, one of whom is also studying to be a minister, the other of whom works outside of Pittsburgh. And it's I'm full of interests and love music of a huge variety. I love sports of a huge variety. It's I live in Greater Cleveland now. It's a little harder to be a sports fan in Greater Cleveland than it is in some other places, but it just means that we have more hope than many people do. One of the things that means the most to me in my life is connecting to people. It's what really enriches my life in ways that are immeasurable. I have this opportunity all the time to be present with people in a variety of situations in their lives. And one of the great gifts is to hear the stories that they tell me about who they are, where they were born, who they were as children, what they grew into, the struggles they've had, the immense triumphs they've had, the grace that's come to them, the things that have broken them. And to be able to hear those stories and to connect over those stories has been really the greatest gift for me. Stories for me are this wonderful way of connecting us. There are lots of things that I could say to you that might be deeply true, but that might not connect us. I could tell you, for example, that, forgiveness is a great and wonderful virtue. And it is, of course, true to say that. But you don't know anything really about forgiveness until we talk about it in terms of our lives. So if I tell you instead that I once deeply hurt a friend of mine and that it was hard for me years later to face him, and we talk and I tell you the story of that, then I think we know each other in a way that we can't if I just say forgiveness is a great virtue. Because it's in that connection that you see that I have done something that you likely have done as well, and that together we have gotten through many of these things. There may be other challenges that we haven't gotten through, but in telling those stories, that's how we can connect. And it's that connection that is such a rich and vibrant part of our lives. Without that connection, we are solo. We're alone in many ways. So it's the stories that bring us together. When I can see in you things that I've experienced, and you can see in me things that I've experienced, and we can know ourselves as commonly challenged and graced, then together we have this rich connection that we wouldn't have otherwise. So I consider my role in a large part to both hear those stories, and then as one who preaches every week, to tell those stories, to tell the stories that help people to see their connections to each other and to a power greater than any of us that we, in our tradition, call God. So those stories then become really paramount in helping to identify to develop a sense of who we are and where we're going and what's most crucial in life. So when I think about what's most important to me, what I'm most passionate about, it is in hearing these stories that people tell, and it's stories that encompass the whole range of life. When I was growing up, I remember my parents talking about my own birth. They would say, they could just have said dryly, you were born at Eastern Maine General Hospital in Bangor, Maine on January 15th, 1955, and that's all true. But it's a little bit dry, and what they would say instead when I was very young was, on a clear, cold night in January, Hammy was born, and Mommy was glad, and Daddy was glad, and everybody was glad. And then they would tell the story that my father, who taught at a seminary in Maine, went to the seminary chapel at 2 o'clock in the morning and rang the bells in the chapel so that everybody in the seminary community would know that something had happened. Well, that conveyed to me something about my birth that was special to them, and it conveyed that I mattered to them in a way that the simple recitation of the facts wouldn't. So there's this sense in telling stories that we can convey deep truths and deep loves and all the rich dimensions of our lives in those stories. We depend on those stories. I think about the stories we tell in our lives, but in also not just in interpersonally, but how important they are in the wider culture. We've been watching in our house Downton Abbey in the last several weeks. We're way behind where season 3 is going, but we're just watching season 1 now to get caught up. And I'm just so struck by the interplay of the characters and the Sybils and Marys and Ediths and Mr. Bates and the whole all the varieties of characters who are there, and they are living out all the issues that were so prevalent in the early 20th century about women's place in society, what the meaning of war was going to be for British culture, and the whole class struggle that was there. We could talk about those, and we do in history books or in just reciting the facts, but it's not the same as hearing the stories. Hearing those stories, seeing them played out, which is what happens in drama, television, movies, you get to see and learn at a gut level in a way that you can't when you're just talking about facts. So those stories about my birth, about the society in Great Britain in the early 20th century, all those stories help bring to life what is most central in life. And my passion then is to be part of those stories, telling those stories and hearing those stories, because I have the sense that telling the stories for other people is freeing. So when I can create a space so that they can tell the story about their own struggles as a child, the fact that they may have been raped earlier, or that they struggled in a marriage, or that they had a difficult time with a child. All of those things, when they have a chance to talk about them, can be freeing and can lift burdens and can connect us in ways that nothing else can. A lot of the burdens that just weigh us down can be freed. The top can come off, and a new energy, a new spirit can come in, and that's what we try to do as part of a church, is to provide a space where people can do that. We also, in a very different vein, we tie those stories in a church to a larger story. It's one thing for you and me to tell each other stories of our own lives. It's another thing, and it's a deeper thing, for us to connect those stories to a larger narrative. One of the difficulties in the times in which we live, sometimes called by scholars post-modernity, is that there is no, what scholars will call, a meta-narrative, no big narrative that ties us together. There's no one big story that we all see ourselves as part of. So we end up telling the smaller stories, and I don't mean to diminish the stories at all, but the stories of our own particular lives rather than the bigger story. And that storytelling that we do to each other is crucial. But I would say, as a person of faith, that there's also another story that we need to connect to, because the story that God tells in our lives, this story of people enslaved and then made free, of people dead and made alive, of people struggling and finding resolution, that all the struggles that are articulated in the story that Jews and Christians tell, those stories are the stories of our lives. We too have been trapped by things from which we've needed to be freed. We too have died in ways from which we need to recover and find new life. And so I can tell you my story, and that's really important, but it's also important for me to know that it's connected to a larger story. So while post-modernity may not want to tell that meta-narrative, I think we as Christians still do tell a story that encompasses us all. We don't tell the story as a way of saying this is what you need to feel, or what you have to feel, or what you have to experience. We tell it as a way of saying this is the way the universe works, and we understand that there is something grand and wonderful going on of which our stories are a part. And when we can see ourselves in connection with that great story, that also frees us and gives us a new way to look at life and look at the world. One of the things that matters so much in a genuine, what I think of as a genuine faith, is exploring questions that are the deepest kind of questions in our lives. Where people in religious communities get caught up and they argue immensely about the what and the how, and we do that in all kinds of dimensions of our lives. The really important question is not those questions, but the who and the why. So, for example, people will talk about the creation stories at the book of Genesis and argue about if it happened that way, and it's such a secondary question. The questions that text, those stories answer, are not about what happened or when they happened. It's about who we are. They're declaring that we're in some way blessed children of a creator who made us, and that there's something really fundamental about that relationship. So it's this who and whose we are. That's what that story tells. And that's the important thing about any story that you and I connect on, is who are we? Then we can't argue about that. If you tell me something about you and who you are and why that matters to you, there's no arguing about that. We're simply declaring who we understand ourselves to be. And it's that really matters, and it's that connects us. And so in a big story, what we might call the meta-narrative, those stories, that's what we connect with, is the who we are and the why we are, not how and what happened. And so that's what's really important to me in my sense of living out the Christian faith that I have. I recently was studying with a teacher who teaches preaching, and she was having us look very intently at one particular biblical passage. And she said what happens is people tend to focus on the nouns, and the nouns get in the way. There's a noun, it says something about shekels or Hittites in a story, and you don't connect with that at all. She said focus instead on the verbs, because with the verbs, that's where you connect. She had us list verbs that have to do with snails, and they were all verbs that we would also engage in, that they eat, they move, and it's those verbs that are what connects us, the things that we do and feel and think. That's what makes us sort of part of this one body of the earth's people. So focusing on the why and the who, and looking at the verbs of our lives, in addition to all those things that we feel, that's where we connect. And that's what we do when we tell stories to each other. I have two sons who are in their early 20s. I am acutely aware that they and their friends are not churchgoers, and my whole life has been centered in the church. And I wonder daily why the church does not reach people who are younger. And I don't have any answers for that, but I have a sense that what people are searching for is that deep sense of connection. So developing this sense that we tell stories to each other, and that we can connect over the simplest, most basic dimensions of our lives, to find ways of encouraging and developing settings so that people can talk together about those things, is really crucial and fundamental if we're to survive another generation. We say in our business that the church is always one generation from extinction, and what is it that will allow the church to continue to thrive? It's not that the church needs to thrive for its own sake. My own deep belief is that the church should thrive because it offers a way for people to sense something deep and holy and precious about their lives. So when I think about what I would want people to know about the church, what I want them to know is what Jesus heard at his baptism, which is that the clouds open up and a voice from the heavens says, "You are my child, you are the beloved, in you I take delight." And I want my sons, I want your children, I want everybody to know that there is a holy power in the universe who takes delight in you, in your children, in your grandchildren, because that is kind of the fundamental building block of our lives, to know that in some sense the universe and the one who created the universe takes delight in who we are. If we know that, then it allows for all sorts of possibilities. If we don't, if we just feel alone, isolated, just by ourselves in the universe, then there's little that will kind of prompt us to be living a life that's joyful and generous and giving. So it's really important. It's the thing that I would want people to know, and to tell stories about the times in their lives when they really felt as though they were accepted and when they were loved. One of my favorite religious expressions is from a sermon from the middle of the last century by a theologian named Paul Tillich, in which he said, "You are accepted. You are accepted by a power greater than that which you know, and your sole job really in life, your most important job in life, is to accept your acceptance." And when you can accept that acceptance, then it is a freeing thing that can allow you to go on to live in the fullest way possible. One of the things that's a difficult part of our lives, I think, is the things that we think. We all think different things. An awful lot of the things that have divided us have been related to the things we think. And so one of the things that occupies my imagination is how to think in such a way that it's not divisive, that it doesn't throw barriers in people's ways, but that it somehow deepens the life that we have together. The church that I've grown up in has often divided the world by an insistence on a certain kind of dogma or doctrine, and that has been a problem in the world, because there's this kind of sense that I'm conveying to you that you need to think the same way I do, and I don't want to be doing that. In my work, because I focus on storytelling, I want people to be not focused on those doctrines and the things that divide us, but on the things that connect us. So we tend to talk in our work about witness, about meaning talking about my own life. This is what I have discovered, rather than this is what I think you need to believe. So that whole sense of witnessing, of connecting by what I connecting with you by telling you what I have sensed and known, but that's more important than us determining some kind of doctrinal wholeness that everybody has to believe, whether they really want to or not. So it's really important to me to be focused on that sense of my own experience of things. At the same time, it's really we've been given these remarkable organs called the brain that are full of thinking, both sort of overt and more tacit ways of thinking, and to use those brains in a healthy way is really important. When I was in my early 20s, I had no idea what I was doing with my life. I felt just lost and alone, and I wandered one day into a church in Boston, Massachusetts, where a preacher was the main preacher there, and he articulated things that I had no idea were even going on in me. He asked questions that I didn't know I was asking, and those questions were more important to me than the answers even that he would offer, because somehow all these things were swirling around in me, and to be able to ask the questions about who I am and what I'm doing and why I'm alive and why all of us are alive and what's our purpose on earth and what kind of ways can we be caring for each other, all of those things related to how our brains are working are really important. And for me to have that engaged was a really crucial part of my growth into some better understandings about who I am and what I'm about in life. So engaging the mind is really important. I think in terms of engaging, as a preacher, I think in terms of engaging both heart and mind in what I do. I don't want to just be telling stories about life, because then there's no kind of sense of overarching meaning to those stories. But I also don't want to just dryly tell you facts about faith or life, because then there's no real connection. So there's some combination of both that's really important. So I can say that love is really important, a dry truth, And then I can tell you a story about a way in which my wife really loves me. And the story connects to that truth that I uttered about love, and both are important. Both what the mind says, that love is important, and what the heart says as I tell you about how that love has made a difference in my life. The most powerful part of my life is thoughts, yes, but it's also my feelings. Those are what occupy a good deal of the time that I spend alone and in private. What am I feeling about the day, the weather, the way somebody just treated me, something they just said to me, some offer that somebody made to me. I may feel real elation at that, or desolation when I feel as if I've been left out of somebody's company. And all of those things are kind of at the root of my life. So it's really vital to me to be connecting on the basis of feelings. I think one of the things that happened into churches is they lost a sense of feeling in many ways, and so people who needed to talk about feelings went instead to therapists and counselors because they needed a place to talk about that reality in their lives, and to 12-step programs and other things that were kind of outside of the mode of the church. And what the church, I think, has to do is recover that sense that we are connected by our feelings, more so even than by our thoughts. And to be able to find that connection and to create space for that. One of the things I've done a number of times in my own ministry is to offer what I call a spiritual autobiography class, and in which I just limit it to 6 or 8 people, and we take the time, each of us, to tell the story of our lives as we would tell it from a spiritual standpoint. That doesn't mean we have to give this, false overlay to something we don't really believe. It is to say that the deepest experiences in our lives are in some deep, wonderful way holy. And so as we talk about those, as we make space for them, as we convey them to each other, then we have this connection on the basis of those feelings which unite us, and which so deeply need to be told. They're in there aching to be released, and to offer space for those seems really an important part of what the life of the church is about. To have a really full life, we all have to do something more than just feel. Just to feel is in a way incomplete. It feels like a first step to me. So to move beyond that feeling stage is to find a place where we all can act in some way that shows the same sort of love that we have been shown. So if I indeed am treasured by God, then my role in life is to spread that feeling of being treasured to the people with whom I come in contact. And it means, in a way, devoting myself on a daily basis. It might be worth just thinking, what today can I do to show that treasured feeling to somebody who needs it? Maybe it's a phone call to somebody who's really depressed. Maybe it's a visit to somebody who's just had surgery. Maybe it's a regular commitment to be part of a community that is changing lives. One of the things that we find most important here at Federated Church, where I serve, is a sense that changing lives is fundamental to who we are, and to have what we call a ministry, a way of serving, a way of caring, a way of making a difference in the world is crucial for the fullness of a life. So life then becomes my sharing, my feelings, but it also becomes my doing something that matters, that makes the world a better place. I know that I can't save the world, but I also know that each little step on that way is a good step, and that being part of a community that's involved in healing and making justice and caring for the earth and caring for each other, being involved in a community like that is crucial and fundamental. When I think about the future, it's, of course, impossible to know where we're headed. I struggle with the whole sense of what the future holds, and I'm aware of a number of people who think that life is gradually and slowly getting better. I don't think I count myself in that number. because I'm acutely aware of the holocausts and huge betrayals of trust and love that have happened in my lifetime and in the last century or so. So I'm not a wildly optimistic person, as though the world is getting better and better all the time, but I'm a deeply hopeful person. I distinguish between optimism and hope. Hope is a kind of an investment in a future that I care about and that matters to me and that I think is the best way for us to live. So whether I think today is going to be better than yesterday or whether I think tomorrow is going to be better than today, it doesn't really matter. What I can do is invest myself in the day that I want to have come tomorrow. And when I do that, then I'm part of this larger force for good and wholeness, this force that I know as God, and I'm acting in concert with that way of being. I am being true to the principles that matter to me. And that's, I think, a hopeful way to live. We need to all be living toward what we hope is the kind of the culmination of our lives and of history. One of the things that we contemporaries forget about Jesus a lot of the time was that he was deeply focused on an end time. He thought it was coming right away, as did the Apostle Paul, who wrote a good deal of the New Testament. We know now that wasn't going to come right away. But the truth that underlies that is that there's a future toward which we're heading, and that God is sort of aware of and encompasses all of this. And my deep belief is that a God who made the earth good will also culminate the earth in a good way. It may not happen, it likely won't happen till after I die, but I can invest in that future that I see God as being involved in. And when I do that, then I'm part of this larger force for good. And when we do that together in community, we can do that in ways that I can't do anything alone. There's a much greater force for good when we join together to do that, when we join all of our hopes and dreams and live the way we assume and trust that God is leading us toward. I'm thinking about the process that I go through when I prepare to do a sermon, to what we call preach. And in our tradition, what we do is we begin with a passage of Scripture. These long ago stories that were written. In some ways, they're so foreign to us, so odd in a way. And the question comes, why would you pay attention to a story like this? Why would you retell it? But what happens is, if you pay attention to the story, if you read it through, you will find something in that story that connects with you. I've talked some about the difference between focusing on the nouns and focusing on the verbs. You focus on the verbs in the story, and you have a way of connecting to whatever that story was about. If it's Jesus' baptism, or Jesus healing somebody, or something that a long ago prophet is talking about, what are the verbs there? Is it about eating and drinking? Is it about sharing and caring? Is it about falling away? Whatever it is that's there. So I find as I start to prepare to preach, I read through what the Scripture passages are, and I say, what do I notice? And then after I'm aware of what I've noticed, I think about, why am I noticing that? There's some reason that came into my mind and heart, and there's some reason that it kind of is tickling a fancy in me. It's there, and I have to kind of identify what that is. Maybe it's a passage about somebody being untrue to somebody else. Well, is there some word in there that kind of stimulates my own reflections on that? I had a colleague once who talked, when we would read through a passage of Scripture, he would find the most interesting words that he connected to, and when he did that, we would all kind of identify with what it was. Sometimes it was just the word "the," and he would say "the," and you'd say, well, why in the world did he notice that? But he would then have this kind of interpretation for it. So what I find is that it's really that I need to do is to identify why I'm noticing a passage. And then I figure, if I notice something in that passage, that others are noticing it too, and that whatever the reason that I'm noticing it, then there's something there that's important about it. So then I kind of reflect on that. Well, what is it about these words that I'm noticing? If it says, in you I take delight, God is speaking to Jesus at the baptism, why am I noticing that? Well, maybe that day I didn't feel much sense of God's delight in me. Maybe I just feel I'm letting God down. So I need to look at that, and maybe this is the occasion for me to be reminded that I am one in whom God takes delight. Maybe I rejoice in the fact that this day I really am thrilled that I remember that. And maybe this is an occasion for me to talk about my gratitude for that. Whatever the reason that I've noticed in you I take delight, then that's something for me to address in a sermon. And then I'm looking for stories and feelings and occasions that kind of manifest that delight or the absence of delight that somebody is feeling, and to find ways so that people can be reminded of the truth that lies beyond their experience, and to be reminded that God is present and active and cares for them even in the most desolate of times in their lives. And I try to find a story that will articulate that and will make that clear. We'll open it up like a flower blooming. I'm aware of how difficult it is in this day and age for our church and for the church in a larger sense to speak to a new generation of people. And yet I'm convinced, deeply convinced, that at the heart of everyone there's this need and a desire to connect with something holy beyond who we are. So how do we get people to see that? And for me, there's a matter of sort of paying attention to what we see that really is holy and that is beyond the kind of mundane parts of our lives. When we can perceive the beauty in a sunset or in the sound of some cardinals who make their way past us, the sight of an eagle. But it's more than just a natural world thing, too, that when we can see in our interactions with each other a kind of a holy dimension to it. There are times when I will talk to one of my sons on the phone and realize that something is happening that's just, it kind of has a deep beauty to it, and I can't explain it, but I perceive in that something that's holy. Some interactions with my wife Mary, a time that I'll have at the bedside of somebody who's dying, to be present with a little 5-year-old who's running around the house, and I'm chasing him, and we're just kind of laughing and screaming, and there's something so richly beautiful and joyful about it that it's more than just an ordinary moment. It's the sign of something that is holy, and there's this kind of spiritual dimension to it. So my job is to look for that and to find those moments and to articulate them and identify them. And as a pastor, my role is to help people in the church find those moments and identify them as holy, as these sacred moments, and to see something spiritual in them. So how do we do that with a generation that does it in a very different way? I'm not sure. None of us is sure. And we're trying to find ways that build in a deep sense of connection between people, but also allow for an opportunity to serve and care in wider ways for parts of the community beyond what we might normally see. And it's in that sharing, it's in that caring that we can be kind of spreading that sense of what's holy and living it. That one of the things that people talk a lot about in churches now, and that I think is really important, is the sense of discipline. Not in the sense of a kind of an onerous burden, but in the sense of regularly practicing ways of being that connect us to something holy. I was aware recently of the basketball coach Brad Stevens, who coaches at Butler, and he talked about the mundanity of excellence. He practices things again and again and again, and then lets go of the results, because it's in the doing of that daily discipline, that daily habit, that the excellence emerges. And to practice our faith in the same way with the mundanity of excellence, meaning that on a daily basis, mundane coming from the word earth, that in this earthly way, in the daily habits of our lives, to see an excellence. In this case, I call it a spiritual beauty, to see this presence of God, that's what we're about. And it's sort of training our eyes and hearts to see what's there around us all the time, but that we lose sight of in the kind of daily grind of living. Can we pause? Can we just look at the world in a new way? Can I look at you in a way that I see not just another person, one of 7 billion people, but to see another heart and life with whom I can connect, and between the two of us there can be this love that expresses that love of God. That's my work. Our work is to look for those those signs of God's presence in the middle of our lives.